We're going to begin with the stem stitch, and the stem stitch is one that you use on a lot of stems, as you might think. Kind of gives you a rounded line. So you're going to begin by coming up through the fabric. I'll make the stitches a bit larger than they're going to be in the class so that you can see them for this video. You're going to take the thread down the length of your stitch and pull it through, and then don't pull it all the way through, just pull it almost all the way through, and then about 2/3 of the way into that stitch you're going to pull it back up again, so it's going to kind of overlap, and at that point you can pull the whole thing through and you'll see that it overlaps. Now we're going to do that again. So put your needle back down through to the length of your stitch. Don't pull it all the way, maybe kind of hold it with your thumb and come back about 1/3 of the way, and then we're going to pull it all the way through. I'll do this a couple more times for you. Down, and then 1/3 of the way, and then come through. So you'll see it makes a nice rounded line. You can do it for a straight line also, but we've got a better stitch for that one. So this is sometimes used for an outline stitch also. And I'll do one more for you. And that's the stem stitch. The next stitch we're going to do is the back stitch. So again, you're going to come up through the back of your fabric, and you're going to make a stitch the length of your stitch, whatever you choose it to be. I'm going to use a longer stitch just so that you can see what I'm doing, and you're going to pull your thread all the way through, and then you're going to come back up the length of a stitch. Try to make your stitches about the same length, and then you're going to go back, hence the back stitch, to the first stitch and push your needle down through the same place. So they kind of meet up and you get a really nice straight line. So this is the one that you would do for really straight lines. Come back up again, go back into the second stitch just at the end and pull it through, come back out, and back into the end of the third stitch. I'll do a couple more for you. So you're kind of stitching backwards, so to speak, because you're going to come up where the stitch ends and go back to where the stitch begins, and they match up the ending of one stitch and the beginning of the next stitch, so you get a nice line. And that is the back stitch. So we're going to make a French knot. This is a bit more difficult than the other two that we've done. So you come up through your fabric again, and you're going to hold on to that strand that you've just pulled through, and you're going to take your needle and wrap it twice. Wrap your floss around the needle twice, and then you're going to push that needle down through the fabric really close to the first hole where you brought the floss up through. So pull it through, and you see you've got a nice little knot. Now let's try that again. This one's a bit more difficult. So you're going to pull the thread up, hold on to it and give it a little tension. Take your needle and wrap it twice. Push the needle back down close to the hole that you brought your floss up through, and gently pull your needle through that knot. You want to make sure that that knot stays really close to the fabric. Pull, pull, pull. There you go. I'll do it one more time. Bring the needle up. Put a little tension on it. And wrap. Sorry. Put a little tension on it. Wrap the floss twice. And push it back down into close to the same hole, and pull through. There you go. That's the French knot. Okay, we're going to do the satin stitch next. The satin stitch is a good one for filling in areas, and it gives you a nice smooth surface. So we're going to use this simple leaf pattern as a start here. So you pull your thread up through, and then you're going to take your thread down the length of a stitch, and in this case I'm going to just go back to where that line is in the center of the leaf and just keep going from the center of the leaf to the outside of the leaf. And back to the center, so you're just kind of crossing back over a little bit at a time. And you see the stitch is getting a little wider, so it gives you a little bit of texture. Even though the surface is going to be smooth from all the floss, it's still going to give you the texture. The individual stitch, you'll kind of see that perhaps on the video here. Back to this center. You want to keep your stitches kind of close together because you don't want to see a lot of the background fabric. And you want to try and stay on that line. There you go. So you see it's starting to get filled in. And that's called the satin stitch. This next stitch is called the blanket stitch. And the blanket stitch is often used when you're trying to stitch something else onto a piece of fabric. So it's called applique when you do that, when you put a piece of something else on top. I don't have anything like that right now, but the blanket stitch, you do the blanket stitch the same way. So you would come up along the edge of whatever it is that you've got, You can also use this to edge, just edge a piece that you have. Kind of makes a nice, pretty edge. Okay, so you're coming up, and then you're going to imagine that your stitch is going to be so wide, and you're going to come up the top and come down at that spot. So the length of your stitch here, and catch that so it loops around your thread that you've pulled through. Let's do that again. Looks a little tricky, but it's really quite simple once you start working on it. So you're going in and then back up on that line. And then back in and up. And a couple more times here. Threads twisting. Okay. Back up. And one more time. In and back up. And that's called the blanket stitch. It's a nice way to finish an edge or to anchor another piece of fabric on. Blanket stitch. This last stitch we're going to do is the Bullion Stitch. It's also known as the caterpillar stitch. It has a lot of texture on the front of your work, kind of like a French knot, but it will be an oblong stitch. It's a bit difficult to do, so it's not something that you want to try right off the bat, but it does have a nice effect when you're doing flowers. So I'm going to show it to you, and we might or might not use it in the class. We'll see. You might want to try it. It is a little bit fun to do once you get the hang of it. So we're going to pull the thread up through the bottom, and then you're going to make your stitch. So these, again, I'm going to make kind of a larger stitch. And come back up through where you brought your thread up to begin with. So you're just kind of making a loop here, going in, coming back out. And you're going to leave the needle in the fabric, and you're going to wrap about 6 times. 4, 5, 6. Do not pull your thread too tight. You want those wraps to be a little bit loose because you need to be able to pull your needle through those loops without any difficulty. So holding on with your thumb to the wraps, just a gentle touch, push the needle up and just kind of work the needle through those wraps. Again, like I said, it's a little bit of a fiddly process here. And then once you're through the wraps, you want to work your needle back towards you. And then you just have to work those threads. I'm not sure if you can see that. Just work those threads down, just pulling gently on the needle, and just work them down. There's a lot of fiddling on this, and you just keep working it with your thumbnail, until you get the knots in place, and you'll see that the length of your stitch is covered with a little caterpillar. And then you push your needle back through, and there it is. Let's do one more stitch since they are a little difficult. And I'm going to do it kind of like you might do on a flower, because you often do these in the center of a flower. So you come up and back down the length of your stitch, come back up to the beginning of that stitch, leave your needle in the fabric, and wrap about 6 times. Hold your thumb on the end of the wraps, push the needle through, and then work the needle all the way through. Hold on to the wraps and then pull the needle towards you and kind of scoot those wraps down until you've got a little caterpillar. And when you've got them down kind of tight, covering the length of your stitch, just push your needle back through and you're done. That's the bullion stitch.